Hey everyone, this is Jeff Alberts,
Brian Miner,
Alberto Nunez,
Brad Loomis,
and Eric Helms.
and this is the 3D Muscle Journey podcast, where we bring you world-class coaching and evidence-based education for the natural bodybuilding community.
All right, welcome back, 3DMJers. Today we are going to address it's been a hot topic since I can remember when I first started training, and as Berto words it, the question that's been plaguing mankind is, when should I cut, bulk, and maintain in terms of body weight if the goal is, maximizing hypertrophy and just focusing on body comp in general. So when I started, I think it was definitely the path was kind of regardless. If you're putting on muscle, if you want to put on muscle, you're going to start with a surplus. And regardless of how much body fat you had on, which obviously isn't the best approach for some people, but it was, an aggressive surplus and just kind of this cyclical, okay, I got a little bit fat, now I'm going to cut back down, and then I'm going to gain aggressively up and cut back down. And over time, I think we've all refined our approaches with that. And now I think that we're older. It's, our general advice is to kind of maintain tighter ranges and maybe less emphasized periods of surpluses where we're kind of putting all our chips in that direction and gaining assertively. But Berto, when did you, I know you kind of had a nice dreamer's bulk back in the day. What were some of the lessons you learned from that?
Well, I think before I got into the bodybuilding, influenced by bodybuilding, because, it was one thing, it was like you and then there's Ronnie Coleman. And it's like, we're all trying to head in that direction and there is no middle ground. So what are you doing? Like weighing what you're weighing. Ronnie is, I don't know, 250, 260 on stage, right? Which is insane. People don't realize, that's an emaciated human being on stage. Like, my 250 compared to that 250 was, not emaciated by any means. But before that influence, I had a very, man, it kind of reminds me of how you described, it's one of your billboard hits, Brian, when it comes to progression, right? It was like, I want to gain weight, but I want the weight gain to be a side effect of my muscle gain. So I wasn't actively pursuing weight gain. I was just like, you know what, I'm going to lift weights and, eventually I'll accrue more of the good stuff and that will show up on the scale. And it was very sensible. But then I discovered the bodybuilding.com message board forums, and in particular, the teen section. That's all you would hear is like, what are you doing, kid? Like, you're wasting time. These are some of the best years you'll ever have with your training. And absolutely true. But the general consensus for everyone was bulk, and in a very linear way. So pound a week, which ridiculous, right? So yeah, anyhow, eventually I got myself with a lot of it was just, I didn't know what was natty and what wasn't, because it was the exact opposite from these kids. Like, I just gave everyone the benefit of the doubt that, probably natty. And one of my off and on training partners ended up becoming an IFBB pro. He had hopped on that side, and I'm like, whatever he's gaining, I got to gain, because I want to, we're both pursuing this pretty vigorously, and we want to end up in more or less the same place. So if he reported back to me that I hit 210, I'm hitting 210 as soon as I can. And it just continued in that direction. And at least in clothes, and, if you lift weights, whatever you end up weighing at the end of in most cases, like dreamer bulks, it's going to look all right in clothes. And you're going to get a lot of positive comments like, bro, you're a house. And so they're both direct and indirect encouragement to keep things going. And before I knew it, I touched never a 250 morning weight, but it was a 250 with clothes weight at the gym, like sweats, big baggy clothes. Come to find out, like a lot of us, that was a big waste of time, but a lot of fun. but at the end, I probably could have done some reallocated my time a little bit better. And that's what we're here to do today, is to prevent people, especially because often the people who have this question are people who are in a similar situation, like, somewhere in their 20s, early 20s. And they just got into lifting and they don't know what they should focus on: weight gain, weight loss, that sort of deal.
So, what would you guys recommend if somebody if you get a client that's starting up and they let's say they're 2 years into their training career, like late novice, early intermediate, say between 15 and 20% body fat. How would you approach that situation?
15 to 20% body fat.
Yeah.
So I'm going to assume they're well fueled.
Yeah.
There's enough available energy on their body. If their nutrition is in order, if they're maintaining that body weight for a while, then I know they're well fed. So chances are their energy is good. And it's a matter of like, okay, what's that training look like? Is that training on point? Is it well structured? Are they skillful in the gym? Do they know how to push intensities? That's what I'm going to focus on more so, because that's what's going to drive the hypertrophy is the training
Yeah.
itself. It's already well fueled. So, and then of course you got to check in on their mental, their meaning, like how focused are they on like trying to be leaner? Like if that's a high priority or not. Because sometimes if it is, it's like, okay, if you start cutting, that's going to be counterproductive towards what you really want. And that's to put on size, more muscle, not body fat size, but more muscle size. And sometimes you just, if you're well fueled, you just sit in that environment and you train and you allow time to do its thing. I think a lot of people go wrong because they think they got to like, okay, I need to get down to 10% body. That's a kind of like that golden rule thing. It's like, I got to get to 10% body fat. Then it gives me more runway to gain. Like, well, you just spent 2, 3, 4 months getting down to 10%. That's time away from the big picture. You just spun your wheels. Congratulations. Because now you got to recover from that. And then it's going to take you even longer to get back to where you were and then put yourself back in that environment that you were in the beginning. So it's better just to say, okay, I'm going to invest the next year or two and just keep training, because eventually you're going to make 15, 20% look a bit better. And then once you have a bit more under the hood, then you can maybe, shed some weight and see what you got under there. Because, you lean down to, let's say 12%, it's probably going to look like 10% as far as the level of conditioning, but yet you have more muscle mass to show for it. So that's what I'm going to do with someone like that more times than not, unless there's, some insecurities around how they look, how they feel. And it's kind of robbing them of their daily, like their quality of life. Like if it's just really robbing that, then okay, we're going to just, maybe do something that we probably shouldn't do temporarily just to get you more motivated, to bring your confidence level back up. Maybe it's not 10%, but maybe it's like, let's lose a few pounds here. And then we kind of go from there.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to weigh all those options out.
It's interesting because I feel like, like you said, Berto, everyone was kind of told to bulk. They sort of assumed that was their default. And maybe it was just me and in my corner of the gym, who I associated with, but it was pretty rare for somebody a couple years in to want to run a cut. And I think now with social media, we see that a lot more. Would you guys agree with that? In terms of like just people almost trigger happy on entering a cut when they still are in those phases where there's relatively low hanging fruit when it comes to muscle gain.
Yeah. I mean,
I would agree. Yeah.
I think sometimes sometimes when you're sitting in that 15 to 20% for a prolonged period of time, there's things probably happening that are positive. You just can't see it quickly. So people get a little bit maybe discouraged or they get complacent because they're not seeing much happening. So they're more focused on the aesthetic side of things versus like what's actually happened in the gym. Because if you're performing really well, that's where your focus should be, is like on your performance. Because if you're leveling that up over time, then chances are it's going to translate back into your physique later down the road. So I think of it as like investing. It's like sometimes you get paid, like, okay, I'm going to put $100 in there, It's like not a lot. You're like, okay, it's just $100, but over time, like a year later, you're like, okay, there's $1,200 sitting there. That's pretty decent. 2 years and you got a little more money there. Like, okay, now I can actually go and take the family on vacation now. So you get to reap the rewards from that. So it's like you're investing. And, I've been training close to 40 years now. It's like you have plenty of time to invest. You have plenty of time to cut. So yeah, you just have to, like, your trajectory is probably the most important thing, is setting your trajectory up and having the big picture in place. So usually when I have someone for the first time and we're having this conversation, I'm mapping out, a year, maybe sometimes 2 years worth of trajectory. So there's phases there so they can get mentally locked into a game plan. Because I can recall back when back in my 20s, I didn't have direction with weight gain, weight loss, none of that. I was just like, eat, get big, train, and then, oh, I'm going to start contest prepping. There was no like anything outside of that. There was no like gain X amount of weight per month. There was no like, okay, probably should be sitting in these body weight ranges. My thing was just like 200 pounds. I got to get to 200
Yeah.
pounds. Like I thought if I got to 200 pounds, I was going to be jacked. Calling Berto getting 250. Like it was 200 pounds for me. If I get 200 pounds, then I'm going to be huge. And then you get the influence from other people. Because in clothes, yeah, you look jacked, you look big and swollen, but ask me to take a shirt off for the beach, I'm like, yeah, let's not do that. But at 200 pounds, and then you're strong too. But a lot of that's like, for me at 200 pounds, I was probably like 22% body fat, probably somewhere in there. It's like I'm strong just because of leveraging. So then you're moving heavy weight, you think you're doing something positive, and then everybody in the gym's like, "Oh, bro, you're tearing it up." And then again, you kind of get there though. Once I hit 200, I'm like, I'm fat. It's like, now what? Now what do I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's
And I think-
so structure, like big picture structure, is huge. Like it's so important that you have that set up.
Brad, I don't even know if I know what your early days of training in terms of where you started, in terms of body comp. Did you have a similar approach? Just kind of train and focus on performance?
Actually, no, I didn't. It was, and to be honest with you, I pretty much fit that avatar that you just talked about, Brian. I was like 15-20%. And I started lifting with the mindset, I got to get lean. I got to get abs. I got to get, I got to look like I lift. And so I basically jumped in, like early in my career with that exercise mindset. I'm going to lift weights in order to lose body fat. That was very much my thinking. And of course, knowing what I know now, I would try to talk myself out of it, because I probably wasted a lot of years there. And it wasn't really until I kind of got to a point of I wasn't so insecure about my body, and it was like, yeah, I look fine. I'm just going to lift. And there were some other things that kind of helped align, like my training actually got a little bit more sensible, and I didn't feel the need to lose body fat. And I had the best gains of my entire life during that period of time. But I very much fit that avatar. And, like Jeff was saying, there's a lot of things that you kind of have to uncover, to kind of get a good plan for that person. But what I can say is that at a bare minimum, don't lose body weight. If I would have basically just trained and not even worried about all the X's and O's of volume and intensity and my frequency, if I would have just trained and concentrated on weighing myself on occasion and making sure I was not dropping any body weight, I probably would look different, now. Because those were the years when I was probably, the most anabolic of my lifting career. And so, yeah, that was, learn from Brad's mistake. if you fit that avatar that Brian just talked about.
Yeah, I think it's always hard because for me, I never, I mean, it wasn't until I was sort of out of the novice stages that I started seeking more information on like, how do I further optimize this? And almost sought out what ended up being bad advice in terms of gaining aggressively. But, when I started, it was like, okay, I remember the first program, it was an old hockey coach of mine wrote out for me, and it was very basic, but it was like, okay, I want you to add a couple scoops of protein to your existing diet. And, I started training 4 days a week. And just that alone, like there was significant recomp, and I was gaining weight, but it was clean weight. Like I was improving in terms of body composition. So I think even if somebody's fits that avatar, it can be a disservice to their at least if they're trying to maximize their long-term potential. Arguably, it can be a disservice to try to run a cut early on. Now, if somebody's obviously very overweight when they start, it's like you got to prioritize the health. And so for me as a coach, I look at it as like, what is the priority here? Is it health or long-term potential? And obviously those can go hand in hand, but it's not like somebody who's never trained before. It's not like we're dealing with like people on The Biggest Loser. It's like, okay, let's get them in a place where they're not near death, And so I think that it's a different situation there, but for most people, I think if you just focus on performance and sort of shift your mindset away from the scale and just create that environment that's permissive to muscle gain, you're going to make progress. And I think one thing that I've noticed over time is there seems to be less emphasis on these gaining and cutting phases, because I think more and more people are realizing that it's okay to maintain. And I think that's something I had to unlearn. And I'm still getting better, trying to refine over time, and those ranges are getting a little bit tighter. But it used to be like I had the mentality, if I'm not gaining weight or I'm not losing weight, I'm just spinning my wheels. And that's definitely not the case, I think, even for an advanced athlete. And I think arguably it can be even more important for an advanced athlete. When the rate of muscle gain is so slow, like nobody wants to put on 20 pounds of muscle or 20 pounds of weight with 19 of it being body fat and then diet it off. If you're lucky, that muscle will stick around, And so that's when, like, as people get a little bit older, is the return on this investment worth it in terms of body comp, but also is it worth it in terms of just quality of life and overall health?
That's the big question a lot of people have is like, can I still put muscle on if the body weight's
Yeah.
just staying stable? Like if I'm not
Yeah.
constantly gaining weight, can I keep gaining muscle? And I think, like, again, the training is what's going to create that stimulus. You just need enough food there to support it. And I've like back, I'd say it was maybe 5, 6 years ago. I did explore with a couple of my athletes. They weren't contest preppers. They were more so like serious recreational lifters. And one gentleman in mind, like before I had him, he never really had a like bulk. He's kind of like that skinny fat. He had some muscle there, but it was more like that skinny fat, probably like that, 12 to 15% body fat range, kind of a little on the taller side. So I was like, okay, well, you've tried, maintaining, you've tried deficits, you've tried some slight surpluses, but never explored like big surplus. Like actually, let's go on a gaining phase, like a legit one. And he was a little bit reluctant to it, but eventually he's like, okay, let's give it a go. So we gained probably a good 25 pounds. And of course he got soft. Strength was up, leveraging, of course, but this one of those time to cut down. It took a while to get back down. So it was like more time dieting. And when he did get down, he was really good about keeping track of his visuals too. Like he had data before I even started working with him. He had visual data. He had like benchmarks, like the dates on them and everything, body weights, certain looks at certain body weights. So he kept that data going as we were going through this process. And when he got back down to roughly the same amount, same body weight he was prior, he gained maybe 2 pounds of muscle, maybe. So once I kind of saw that, I was like, okay, can he get the same type of gains, not being so aggressive with the gaining phase? So that's when I started realizing like we're gonna need to start readjusting like our goalposts, like the top end weight, the low end weights. I know I've talked about this on other podcasts, just like closing that gap down. So the next gaining phase we did was about half of what we did that first time around, and then came back down again, and it was roughly the same result, maybe a pound, maybe two. Okay, we realized like, okay, you don't need to go on bulks. It's just like you need to operate in this window here, which makes it a lot easier because it's not extreme. You're not going to the extreme high end of body weights, being fat, being uncomfortable. And for him, eating like a bunch of food is a challenge and was very uncomfortable to do that. So from a digestive standpoint, it wasn't too fun. So just allowing his body weight to creep up maybe 8 to 10 pounds, 12 at most, it was more reasonable. Quality of life was better. And the habits too, as far as like the cutting and the gaining phases was very similar. There was no extremism there. So the calorie ranges weren't like going really, really high or really, really low. It was like kind of in the middle of the ground. And then a lot of his daily habits kind of stayed the same because of it. Yeah, so I think, yeah, just from like, and I did it with one other person. Same thing kind of happened, something similar. So right there, I realized like, okay, we don't need to be doing like these hard gaining phases anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
You just need to be in a well-fed state. That's basically it, and make sure your training's on point and allow time to do its thing. And I think with older population, like someone like myself, you know, there's like big gaining phases. Like I think about my overall health. Like from like, you know, you just don't want to be eating tons and tons of food and gaining excess body fat. Like, I mean, that's not going to be the greatest thing to do from a health standpoint. So you have to look at training age too, not just person's age, but how long have they been training? Because you could have someone who's 30 years old, but they've been training like 15 years. And if it's well structured, you know, let's say they have 10 years of well structured training on their belt, like how much muscle mass are they going to gain at that point with these harder bulks? Probably not a lot. That's not what you said, Brian. It's not worth there's no reward there for as much you're putting into it.
You brought up a good point that I think gets overlooked often with just habits. Because I remember I would run these aggressive gaining phases. Then anytime I cut, I would try to like flip the switch and do something like implement structure all of a sudden, you know, and it's just like the pendulum swinging back and forth. And so that's an advantage, I think, early on. Even if somebody can benefit from a surplus, it's not usually wise for it to be aggressive. At least, you know, make sure that you understand like these habits are going to carry over for a while. So might as well put yourself in that environment that you can sustain this. And I think that's going to serve people really well across their lifting career, not having that on-off mentality. And I think that's where I probably got that early on in training, is just feeling like, okay, I either need to, you know, it's like I read an article by Dave Tate and you know, I'm adding olive oil to protein shakes. It's like just disgusting. And then, you know, doing these aggressive cuts, you know, low carb. And it's like, if I would have just marinated in a comfortable spot, like even if you gain a little bit more muscle with a gaining phase, a lot of people like, okay, in 8 weeks, if I have this big surplus and let's say I gain a pound of muscle, just theoretically, that same person, if they then cut, they could lose some of that. But what they're not realizing is, okay, maybe the person that took a maintenance mode or just a very, very conservative surplus, maybe they gained like 0.75 pounds of muscle. So in that time frame, they gained less, but they're not having to, like, they get paid back for that on the second half of that. You know, they're not having to diet, and so you end up oftentimes ahead just by taking the conservative route, because you're not having to. It's not time away from productive training. So like a cut is never ideal for strength or hypertrophy, regardless if it's a competitor or non-competitor. Like it's always time away from the bigger goal in some sense, I think.
Here's a question for Berto, and like, because my observation, and correct me if I'm wrong, Berto, but it's like you're obviously advanced now, but yet your physique has leveled up in your 40s. Like you've improved your physique, but your stage weight is roughly the same. It's not like you're seeing drastic increases in your stage weight, but yet you're refining your physique. Like your back looks drastically improved when you were competing in your 30s or even your late 20s. Like you had a good physique back then, but now it's like there's just like more density to it. Your lats are thicker. Like everything just looks better overall from top to bottom. So visually, you've improved quite a bit, and I don't think it's from you like going on these big gaining phases. It's like you've kind of just been sitting at a certain body weight where you're marinating there in a well fueled state and just allowing that training. I think you've probably leveled up your training more than anything else. Like you've just gotten more like detail oriented and everything's like on lock there. And we can probably say the same thing for Eric. It's not like Eric's been going on these big old gaining phases and accumulating like all the gains that he's accumulated in his 40s. So what's your thoughts there? Am I somewhat right or what do you think?
A big reason that especially newer lifters bulk so assertively, it's because, well, fat loss, I think, to just about everyone knows that knows of like gym culture. It's like that's the hard part. And it's like, no, actually, that's where we have fun. Like it's actually pretty fast paced when it comes to manipulating your body composition. That part happens seemingly overnight compared to muscle gain. And with these large surpluses, I think what the operator of the surplus sometimes assumes is that they're going to make that sinkhole like wider, right? That they could just pour as much water as they want down the drain, and um, yeah, it's gonna show up as muscle, a great chunk of it. But that's just not the case. Like we all have our set limits, and no more food is necessarily going to impact how much muscle you grow beyond a certain point. Um, and I mean, you learn this the hard way typically, right? Like I learned it after my big bulk. I was like, okay, for sure, the dreamer bulk is not the answer. But even with the bulks that came afterwards, um, it was kind of a two-sided monster because I'm like, man, so I gain my pound or whatever, but then I have to like take X amount off, and that always leaves me wondering as to like how much muscle I might have lost. So yeah, over the years, it wasn't just about how much I gained, but how much I kept, right? Like what was the net profit. So that was a big inspiration for the more narrow windows. But it does open up your bandwidth to like focus on other things, such as your training, muscles that you've been kind of neglecting. Like for me, this off season was my adductors. I'm like, you know what? I think this year, like on my back shots, I think I'm saying this right now, but on my back relax, I want to hit it with the adductors popping as opposed to the glutes squeezed. I want to see how I can ride that because it's the first time I've ever done direct adductor work. So there's all these little rocks that you haven't turned. I think as you become more advanced, that you can focus on. And I've figured out my own. Eric's figured out a few. Um, and if anything, I think it makes your life a whole lot less neurotic in some ways because, we always think of that non-productive level of neurotic as something that takes place with fat loss. But I remember being just as neurotic in some ways when I was trying to gain all that weight where, like I can't skip a meal. Like literally, I cannot skip a meal because if I skip a meal, it will show up on the scale. Um, so yeah, it just opens up things that or options that um I guess kind of teach you that if anything, look, you can't expand the size of that thing sinkhole, but you weren't even using like it to its full capacity to begin with because a lot of the answers are on the training and lifestyle side of things. So and actually while I'm here, play devil's advocate for the bulking.
Well, yeah,
Um
I was gonna say that's the next thing. It's like, okay, who should be gaining weight? Like who
yeah.
should be like, okay, yeah, we need to be a little bit more assertive in gaining.
So there was one streak in my bulking on the way to 250. that I was like, man, that did me a lot of good. And so I decided to like just pursue just pure bodybuilding in the best way I knew possible after it was two things. It was a pickup football game. I was getting pushed around. I wasn't used to that. Nothing I could do about it. I'm like, this feels terrible because this was after a year of like pure endurance work. I just wanted to, play in that world a little bit. And it was that. And then I'd get tired from sprints just because it was a different energy system. I did not like that. It felt just weird. So I started at like 140 something. And I remember going to the gym and my best bench, I hadn't benched 225. I hadn't really focused on the bench, but I try every once in a while, was 205 or 3. And it was just a smidge away from 225, but whenever I tried, I'd fail. So I didn't try it for like about a year. From 140 to like 210 is what ended up happening within that year. And I remember after hitting, I think it was like the 110 dumbbells. I remember telling my training partner, I'm like, you know what? That's about 225. That should translate over to 225. Let's go over to the bench and let's see what happens. And it didn't go up once. It went up 11 times. I still remember that to this day. I couldn't believe it after the first rep. And I'm like, I'm going to keep going. And so it made me feel not just strong, but incredibly strong for like the first time ever. So I think especially if you do get someone who has always kind of been that skinny kid, it's a great way to, I think, build a certain level of self-efficacy because we've all like bulked, and there was a point somewhere along the way where you were getting those compliments about how big you look. That felt good. And then, yes, it was a combination of your dimensions and physics, but your lifts were, hey, like you fit into the gym. Like you weren't standing out as like, dude, that guy's like weak. He's got a 25 on the bench. Like if anything, you're like, man, right now I'm that guy like benching the most in this room. Like that felt pretty awesome. So I think especially for, of course, you have this conversation with him that I don't think this is necessarily going to expedite the rate of muscle mass that we gain. And we will probably have to take it off at some point. But for some folks, especially again, when you're younger and you want to see the progress now, to see your lifts go up in a pretty linear fashion, sometimes that can really keep you in the game. Because when you are trying to maintain weight, it's the loads will go up, but more often than not, it's going to be load progressions and things like it's just slower. Um, so yeah, I can see scenarios where I'm like, man, he's 6'1", 140, you know, um, let's make him feel big for the first time ever. But of course, to a sensible extent, we don't want to get to healthy places. I don't think 250 was a great place for me to be long term.
Let's dive a little deeper in this. So you went from 140 to basically 240, 250. So it's like 100 pounds a game.
Yeah.
That,
Like in 3
did you do
years.
that linear, like straight shot, or did you break it up, or how did you?
I think I would break it up in those little cut cycles every once in a while, but I'd usually ditch those after a month because I'm like, you know what, this sucks.
You just want to gain.
Like,
Yeah.
just know your habits, like Brian was saying, like they're so different. Like when you're gaining hardcore, you know how it goes. It's like, oh, pizza, sure, absolutely. Um, right. So to go from that to probably overly restricting because you don't know any better because you haven't done a whole lot of fat loss, and you haven't trained in a environment where the ratio of where you're just not as well fueled, that's a skill in itself as well. So I have little hiatuses, but after like a month or so, it was back to
Back to
gaining because it
gaining.
was easier. It was my comfort zone.
So now looking back, I mean, you could look back and go, okay, maybe that should have been phased better. But then you kind of know now, looking in hindsight, like what should have been the cap? Like what was the
Yeah.
cap there? Like where you were like, okay, if I stop here, I'm gonna feel good, look okay, I'm gonna perform really well, recover really well, and the rate of muscle gain is probably gonna be just the same, if not better, possibly by not
Yeah.
going to 250. So what would have been that cap, and how would you have phased it differently?
I think it would have been probably like 190. 190. There's a lot of fun lifting for me that was taking place there. I could do other things in life quite comfortably. right? And like food wasn't a nuisance. And not only that, but like in hindsight, what I really would have done, a little off topic, but I would have saved some of that excess grocery bill and like going out to eat and hired me a coach. Because I think, we've come a long way in regards to coaching options, but I'm sure there would have been a few sensible people because I was already in the natural bodybuilding world that would have told me like, hold up,
Well,
kid.
you just
Like,
hired yourself, so you're hiring yourself right now. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
yeah.
you're hiring your 42-year-old self to coach you.
Yeah. No, you're literally letting after that endurance year, I probably would have let my weight come up naturally to whatever it was, kind of what I was doing before the bulking influence. And then from there, yeah, just giving myself like a few options, right? Like a few uh, paths we can travel. It's like, hey, do you want to bench 315 at some point? You might have to go up to, 190 for that. Or are you okay here? Or do you want to involve more sports? Because I was still playing a lot of pickup basketball at the time still. Um, but um, but I mean, neither of those would have been necessarily like not wrong. Um, or they all had their pros and cons, but that very linear long term bulking, there just isn't a whole lot of pros to it other than if you have some very specific strength goal. Like like the only reason I'd get up to above 200 pounds now is if I wanted to try to squat closer to 600. But I'm just not very interested in that. Um, but yeah, it was it was a dark time, but that's what I mean, according to everyone else, like if you weren't doing that, you weren't truly bodybuilding. And a lot of this does come from the enhanced side, because on the enhanced side, like guess what? Like you probably should gain weight if you want to maximize whatever super supplements you are using. Like that, in that case, it makes sense, right? If I hop on a gram of gear, okay, well, like maybe we should consider some weight gain or try to facilitate that so that because that's a completely different size sinkhole now.
Hey 3DMJers, this is Coach Brian Miner here to remind you that investing in expert guidance is one of the time-tested hallmarks of serious athletes across all sports. And for competitive athletes striving for peak performance, working with an experienced coach isn't just a luxury, it can be essential. At 3D Muscle Journey, we understand the dedication it takes to reach your physique and strength goals, and we provide the programming and support not only to get you there effectively, but sustainably. But our craft isn't just for the stage or the platform. We create career-spanning relationships with our clients to guide you along your lifting journey in a stepwise manner. We don't do quick fixes or rush transformations because those will always only be temporary. We know the art and skill of becoming an advanced lifter takes years, and we want to work with athletes who are willing to put in the time and effort. If you want to learn more about all of our coaching options, systems, and prices, please go to our website, 3dmusclejourney.com. We offer weekly coaching for in-season competitors and bi-weekly coaching for off-season and recreational lifters. There are also 3 time-frame options for one-off video consults that each include a training program and nutrition program every 8 to 16 weeks. Our mission is to create athletic careers for serious lifters, and our one-on-one coaching program is how we do that best. It's more than just workouts and meal plans. We deliver comprehensive support tailored to your individual needs. Don't let another training cycle pass without the expert guidance you deserve. Invest in your athletic future now and sign yourself up for coaching today at 3dmusclejourney.com. Thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of the show.
Expanding on your devil's advocate topic that you started off there, Alberto. I want to make sure that we're not like scaring people if they accidentally ended up in a dreamer's bulk, because that's happened many times for us, where people just accidentally, we're trying to get them to recover from an invasive diet, and I mean, I've been there too, and I think a couple of you guys have too. It's just like, wow, I just woke up one day and I was 205 pounds, You just can't eat, you can't stop eating. It's just like you could just end up just in this, I always call it, Bruce the shark in Finding Nemo. His eyes just roll back in his head and he just loses his mind once he gets a sniff of Dory's blood. You get a sniff of that, just a little bit of that cheesecake, and your eyes roll back in your head, and before you know it, it's like a couple months, 2-3 months later, and you're 205, 210 pounds. I don't want to, I don't want to poo-poo that, because I've had just off the top of my head, I've had like a half a dozen people that wake up one day finding themselves in that position. Um, and I mean, the last thing I'm going to do is beat them up, and knowing what we know, I'm not going to tell them, well, we need to start cutting, and it's only been like 8 months after your competition season. Um, we just got to train. We just got to train. We got to make sure that the training stimulus stays in place. And of these half a dozen people that I can think of, it ended up paying off. It was a little bit harder work to get back down again, but the physique looked dramatically different. Heck, you look at the pro bodybuilder case study that's free on 3D MJ Vault. Phil just got a little bit carried away. It was kind of like, well, let's just kind of pull the plug at about 202 pounds, and he was living life, and he was, enjoying his food, and he was traveling a lot for work, and it was a little bit stressful. And yeah, before we knew it, we were 212. And we started what we call the prepositioning diet on the way back down. And we took our time with it, gave him a nice diet break in between. And lo and behold, when he's back down to 155 pounds at stage weight, he looks dramatically different. And I've got a gentleman that's at that point right now. He kind of he's got a big appetite, and he doesn't have any problem putting weight on. And yeah, he got up to 228 pounds or something like that. And right now he's competing at 170. But man, his physique looks dramatically different. It looks dramatically different. And part of that was that he was arguably intermediate, when he competed the last time. And so now, he's a little bit deeper into those intermediate phases while getting up to 225 pounds. We cut down to 200, and he did some powerlifting. And like you said, Berto, when you're at those leverages, where you are just a little bit on the fluffy side, that sure is fun. You sure do feel strong, and sometimes you feel like you just put that on the bar and I'll lift it. But that's just like we've kind of learned that it's not quite as hard to recomp while maintaining your body weight like we thought it was at one time. At one time, I truly believe that if we're not gaining weight, we're kind of like Brian said, we're kind of spinning our wheels. But we've kind of done a little bit of a 180 on that, and obviously you cannot maximize your bodybuilding efforts if you're super lean. If you're if you're well into the single digits, yeah, you're not going to be, regardless of how good your training is, your body's just not at a point to where it wants to build muscle when you're that lean. But on the flip side, if you're kind of heavy and your training is really good and you're enjoying your training and you got the big check marks checked off, you're kind of in an environment for building muscle. You've got, Berto, I think you've said this a couple of times, you've got that potential energy in the form of body fat on your body, and you're never in an energy deficit, even during periods of fasting for 8 or 12 hours while you're sleeping. You're still not in an energy deficit because you've got this body fat that's readily utilized for making up, that energy deficit. That's a very anabolic body at that point, And so I never want to what's the term I'm looking for there? I don't want to demonize when you end up there. You're going to have to address it at some point, but sometimes I think that going up and going back down and going up and going back down and going up is worse than going on the dreamer's bulk. This yo-yo approach of, okay, I made my goal of 195 pounds. It's time to cut. That marinate term that you guys used was the term of the podcast, I think. Just stay at 195, marinate for a while, get some good training in. Let's get on a hot streak and get 2 or 3 mesocycles of training strung together where we're observing performance increases however you record that. I think that's a very anabolic environment, and I don't think that you should be, beating yourself up because you ended up there when you were just living life and, you got a big appetite like I do.
That's a good point, Brad, because I've had stints where my body, like, it's weird. I've been 200 pounds multiple times, and it's never been the same look. I've been 200 pounds when I've kind of, let's say, habits were a bit better and I look better. But I've been 210 pounds driving through the drive-throughs because just the environment that I was in, like the work environment, like I was working at the auto plant. I was sleeping maybe 5, 6 hours a night. I was driving 3 hours a day. So, and during contest prep, that was challenging because I was very structured and routine oriented during prep, robotic, hardcore in a sense, like the old school hardcore. But once that's over with, I'm tapped out. I'm done. I want to let go of all that. So in the off season, I would get very complacent, in a sense, kind of get a bit lazy when it comes to food, and the habits went way off. So it's like swinging into the drive-through, and it's like, okay, I'm ordering, 2 double cheeseburgers, fries, and a Coke, and driving home with that. Then, oh, kind of justifying it. I'm fueling myself to train. I'm gonna have a big session. Then I go in there and crush a big session. Like, see, that food, it definitely did its job. And I would drive through Del Taco and get like 6, 7 tacos and do the same thing. And I would do it post training. So it wasn't like, and it's hard because like, deep down, it's like you probably shouldn't be doing these things, but at the same time, you're kind of justifying it. And it's hard to get out of that. It's hard. And usually for me, it was when my mental bandwidth started to kind of come back around because I would just tap myself out. Like sometimes you just get overly rigid and structured for long periods of time. You don't have that flexibility, then yeah, you get in that funk. So anytime I'm running somebody through a cutting phase, I know we had to talk about when we go to cut and all that stuff, but I think of that, like, how am I going to take this person through a cutting phase? Like, what's this going to look like? What's the timeline? What's the structure? What's the habits? Because if it's overly invasive, it's super restrictive, then, you can rebound. You can kind of be me in a sense. And I want people to avoid that because it's not fun to go and Berto knows well aware of my off-season habits back in the past. It was either I'm on or I'm off. So, it's trying to learn how to manage the stressors, just the daily life stuff and, just trying to keep your emotions in check and trying to keep good habits in place, whether you're cutting or bulking. It's pretty important.
Yeah, you guys all brought up some really good points. I think looking back, I think all of us have had that probably gained too aggressively at some point. And I used to make the argument like I think I look at guys that are around my age that have tried to stay lean the entire time, and they oftentimes are they don't have as much development. And I think, and so I would look at that and think like, okay, there's advantages to these more aggressive bulks early on. And I think what actually was happening there is that it just motivated me in terms of like it placed the emphasis on training when I was gaining more aggressively because I was getting that positive feedback, and it's I wasn't going into the gym to chase a pump. It was to progress in a movement. And so that was like the habits that I was able to carry with me moving forward. So yeah, the people that sometimes all run through a gaining phase is somebody who might be more fixated on like maintaining a certain weight or like a certain body comp, and the training is just sort of a means to an end, and they have less emotional investment in how they're performing in the gym. And so sometimes getting them like, okay, I got some numbers on the board in terms of progression, and now they can take that excitement and we can pull back a little bit and maintain a tighter range. But I think it is a good opportunity to see these large increases in strength, even if physiologically you end up in the same place. I think there's residual benefits there for some people. Now, I also think there's people who gain, they have this all or nothing mentality. And Jeff, you said like, okay, I would justify because I would, I'd go through drive-throughs and have these killer training sessions where I've seen people where if they gain and they lack structure, it's like, okay, well, if I don't have control over my diet, then it's like they lose that motivation to even train sometimes, So
Yeah.
so being able, it does kind of, it depends on the personality of the individual to some extent. Um, so it's, yeah, sometimes if you go off plan or let's say you have a big meal and, for some reason you feel guilty the next day if you go over, like getting in and training is probably the best thing you can do because you're going to have a great training session, even if your diet was a little bit overboard. Um, but what can snowball is if you're like, I ate like shit on Friday, went out to breakfast Saturday. I was supposed to train. I was discouraged. Now I'll start I'm going to write myself a new program on Sunday and start on Monday, so
Yeah.
that can kind of, you see that sort of happen.
If you're gonna eat, make sure you put that food to use.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's interesting because I've also seen the scenario where somebody has those dreamers bulks and they get this positive reinforcement in terms of compliments and their strengths going up, and then trying to get them to sort of unlearn that a little bit and understand like, no, we can progress lighter. It's like, well, I get significantly weaker when I'm lighter. It's like, well, that's where there's like that educational component. Like, okay, that's not necessarily muscle loss. Like you're going to lose strength if you lose any substantial amount of body fat. So it's like finding that, bringing them down and making sure like you're comparing apples to apples when you look at performance, like it's similar body comps. Because if you come down in weight, your strength's going to come down for sure. If you lose 30 pounds, nobody's going to maintain all their strength. But if you can still progress, like if you're still in a good environment, 30 pounds lighter, where you're still able to make incremental progress, then we know that that's probably still a suitable environment without having to push much above that.
I think a way to look at that is you're like, okay, when I was 30 pounds heavier, that's a baseline. When you're 30 pounds lighter, that's a new baseline. From those, so you don't compare those baselines to each other. You compare your single baseline from that point. And I think mentally that's a lot easier to accept that way. Yeah. Another thing to point out for the people who do need to gain a little bit more assertively, learn how to train first before you gain assertively. Because if you don't know how to train, you gain assertively, you're just going to end up being fat. You're not going to really gain too much muscle because, especially if you don't know how to train with skill, meaning move things from A to B or reaching the appropriate proximity to failure. Like you're not going to get that stimulus. So you're feeling like inefficient work. Yeah. So you need to get the training. Like if I have someone that's probably good for newer or maybe even intermediates who don't have the skill yet, but yet they still need to gain weight and put muscle on. It's like, let's learn how to move first. And then once you learn how to move, now let's learn how to train with intensity, meaning hitting failure and learning to progress at that point. Now let's still start feeling you at that point. So it might mean you might need a month, 2 months, 3 months of just learning skill development, which in the grand scheme of things, you take someone like ourselves who have been training for decades, that's worth the investment to learn how to move. Like, so it's a lot of this is learning pace and learning how to be patient and understanding there's levels. It's like a video game, level 1, it's easy. Okay, let's unlock that. Go to level 2, unlock that. So you have to put some type of structure. And that's part of my structure when I get someone like that is like, we're just focused on training more so than like trying to gain weight, lose weight.
That's a very liberating thing too, if you think about it. Because like we started the podcast, the eternal question that's plagued, every lifter for who knows how long now, but do I cut, do I bulk, or do I maintain? When your focus is on learning to move and learning to lift and learning the skill of lifting and learning all of the little variables and things like that, it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it because you can focus on that and know that as long as I'm not super, super lean and I'm not like pursuing a continuous deficit, I just need to train. I just need to train and not, it removes all those variables. I don't have to worry about should I bulk or should I cut. You just train. You just train, look at your body weight every now and then, make sure it's not going down or at least not going down, on the averages as a trend. Yeah, it's a very liberating thing, and it removes a lot of that insecurity about what is, my focus as far as what I'm doing with my body weight and things like that. Because a lot of times that's almost my go-to for a lot of people. I mean, unless of course, Brian, like you were saying earlier, it's a very obese individual and we're talking Biggest Loser type changes that need to be made. My go-to is just let's not lose weight, you know? And it's maybe a little bit outdated, but at the same time, Alberto, your graph that you made years and years and years ago where you were graphing out all of your months in a surplus, your months in a maintenance phase, and then a months in a cut, and you had blue, that basically you were either in a surplus or maintenance, and orange was your cut. The whole 2.5 years was like blue, you know what I mean? And you had this little bit of orange here, and your cutting phase for one prep, there was a little few more oranges here, and then there was like a little orange way at the end. But you looked at the course of like 2.5, 3 years, there was very little cutting, and so that stuck with me. And that's a lot of times that's my go-to, unless it's like we said, two opposite ends of the spectrum. If you're super, super lean, yes, we need to put some body weight on you. You're not in a conducive environment for building muscle. You're super, super, super heavy. Yeah, we probably got to get some of that off of you, especially if you're an old man like Jeff and I and you're over 50.
Who you calling
But
old man?
I guess more so myself than you. Um, but yeah, that's kind of my go-to is let's just not lose weight. Let's not get hasty on these cutting cycles where I made my goal weight and now I got to go back down.
I can think of like a few sort of scenarios we can go over here. I think there's somebody who's uncomfortable in terms of the way they look that want to get leaner. There's the scenario, and they may still be in an environment very permissive to muscle growth. And there's the scenario where somebody's maybe taking a gaining phase too far. And then where it's like, okay, let's strategically work our way back down. And then there's also a common one that I think we've all seen is people coming out of a show gaining more than they expected and they have that mentality. I either need to gain weight to make progress or I need to be cutting. And so they get a little bit trigger happy in terms of wanting to cut again. So how do you manage, I guess, the first scenario where somebody is at the point where, let's say they're in a good environment to build muscle, but they want to be leaner? And let's say a competitor and non-competitor here.
So non-competitor, and there's going to be some similarities, but a non-competitor, I think the first thing I'm going to look at is chances are by the time they got to me, this wasn't the first time they've tried to start fat loss. There's probably been a few failed attempts. So I want to know more about those attempts and if they've had any successful fat loss phases. But usually it's the failed ones matter. They matter because fat loss trauma just hits people in some funny ways, right? Where it takes you a while to get over it. Like ask even the most seasoned competitor, like immediately after they get off stage, like, "Hey, you want to compete next year? This was fun." They'd be like, "Bro, don't ask me that. Let me forget about these hits I took." And the same thing, because for me, like it's like getting shredded glutes. For some people, like it's gonna be just as hard for them based off what they've experienced to get their abs. Like we might take it as like, man, like wow, what it was like couldn't get to 12% body fat, but it's like no, they've never been lean before. They've never had a successful fat loss phase before. So I want to know more details about what possibly went wrong. Could have been a lot of things, like maybe they tried to go too fast. Maybe they just didn't have the right set of like baseline habits. Like they just didn't eat fruits and vegetables to begin with, and all of a sudden they try to take on this bodybuilder's fat loss lifestyle overnight. Um, so I want to look at the infractions, and then also how long ago was it, right? Because it takes a while for the person to get over that, right? When I get off that stage in November, don't ask me about next year, but give me a few months and, maybe I might change my tune a little bit. Same thing with them. They just don't realize it, that it's what they want, but mentally and physically, they're just not ready for that yet. So if that's the case, I think if they've had a few, because this is usually, it's usually the song, they've had a few botched fat loss phases and prior to getting to me, maybe they had one like 2 months ago or something like that. It's like, hey, let's just work on um, a lot of the deficiencies in your skill set. And it can be as simple as like eat more fruits and vegetables. Like, let's work on that because this is going to make it so that should you default to worse versions of yourself, like that is controlled a little better. So we'll spend time on those sort of things. Like, hey, like let's track, but maybe let's track or not track sometimes. A diet that's give or take about maintenance. Let's focus on having a nice team slash rotation of fruits and vegetables in our diet. Let's work on having some sort of consistent feeding schedule, and really like focus on the training. That seems to be the answer at the end, like for all these questions, like whether it's like should I gain, should I cut. So I probably it's often what I do. I do that. It's like, hey, let's brush up on the fundamentals because a lot of people skip out on the fundamentals and they want to go on a fat loss phase. And truthfully, they're just not ready for that. And typically, how I decide if they're ready to go on a fat loss phase, it's two things primarily. I think, well, three maybe. Yeah, three. The first one is like they really start to enjoy their training more. It's like, okay, good. You're starting to fall in love with this part of the process. This is going to be very important. And it's very hard to build a positive relationship with any form of exercise when you're under eating. So cool. We have this thing that they value now, which again is going to be conducive to all phases. And then after that's going to be how good are they doing with their weight stability, right? So if like we're trying to maintain weight, but like we keep trickling upwards in a way that I think is excessive, that's kind of a sign that they're not ready because they're still kind of over consuming. And you add a hypocaloric diet to that, it's probably just going to get worse. And then kind of the last tier for me is how do they respond when it comes to social eating, right? Um, because I mean, all of us here, all those of us competing when we get off stage, like how are we when it comes time to eat socially after a prep? Like it's like we're not sharing dessert. We're getting a few desserts, right? And maybe kind of appropriate in that context, but I'd like for them to be in a place where they just have more self control. And if they can get to the point where it's like, hey, like you can go out and eat and just you kind of make it work. It doesn't have to be perfect, but that's not where the majority of our weight gain's coming from because typically that's or often that's where it comes from. It's like they're pretty good until they hit some sort of obstacle. And most people's unwanted weight gain usually comes from like this social eating. It's not necessarily the calories I gave them, but all these little side quest along the way. So yeah, before I decide if they should go on the fat loss phase outside of they're just really overweight, it's like please like let's just maintain for a minute. Uh and going back to the first one, people just really underestimate the power of strength training and how it can change the way you store energy in your body. Um, it's like even people who preach it, it's like not until they see it on themselves are they like, oh shoot, I kind of lost fat in a non-direct way during this weight stable period. For a few reasons, the weight training, and then also the fact that they're no longer having these huge spikes in calories over the weekend. So typically, that's what I scan for.
You know what's cool about that is basically you're setting them up with habits, skill, and routines. Because that basically once that's in place, they go into deficit. Nothing really changes on their side other than just a reduction in calories. And then when they come, they learn how to hold maintenance too. Because then once you're done with the deficit, and if they want to hold that, let's say, then it's easier to hold because the routine, the habits, the skills there. So it's kind of similar, like when you're, like I was saying earlier about gaining weight. Like make sure your training's in order first. Like you got to have the skill sets in order to start moving the needle one way or the other. That was a good point.
Yeah, great points. When are we running fat loss phases in the off season when somebody's like, let's say somebody is gained more than they wanted to gain in that off season. Are you kind of making them stay put at that weight and kind of refine these habits like you alluded to, Berto? Or in what scenarios are you having them cut back down? Because I think there can be a case for both of those, depending on the individual. It's easy for people to want to get to that top, they get to that top end body weight and they think, okay, my runway's over for the rest of this off season until I get this fat loss taken care of. And I think that's sort of a segue into like the other scenario where somebody just gains way too aggressively after a show and they hit that top end weight. But is there a point if somebody's in a gaining phase deliberately where let's say they're gaining 1% a month or a couple pounds a month, on average, where at what point are you like, okay, let's clean the slate and let's buy back some runway to either maintain from there or if it's the right call, leverage another surplus?
Here's the one thing about being weight stable is that a lot of people think weight stable is like virtually weighing the same thing every day. And no, even that weight stable person that we all have in our life that's like, man, like old Ron's been 150 pounds since high school and he's like 40 years old now, right? Like even if you weighed him throughout the year, like you'd see that, and over the years, you'd see that he has these little fluctuations, right? So weight stable is a 3% up or down. All right, we can classify that as weight stable. So when we talk about people being at a healthy body weight, body fat, where it's like, okay, let's recomp. Um, it might trickle down, it might trickle up, and I think that's something we have to understand. That it's like, hey, I don't. Well, we have to make clear that like, when it comes to recomp phases, which again we're preferring more and more. It doesn't. It's not as hard as it might sound as someone just says it, right? Um, but if someone kind of, and here's the thing. So what happens to most people in the modern food environment is that guess what happens with their weight stable goal is that it ends up trickling upwards over time, right? And this is probably the most successful way I've been able to have people have a lean gaining phase when they request that. It's like, all right, well, just aim for maintenance. And it is February now, and by November, it's like, guess what? You're 7 pounds up.
Yeah.
First lean gaining phase, bro. We kind of snuck that in, right? Um, but if there is some sort of gaining, or again, even the recomp, and you kind of leak upwards, um, I don't unless I feel that hey, it couldn't hurt anything, and I'm not taking away from other components of their education. I'd be like, let's go for it. But something to keep in mind when that does happen is that just simply is where their skill level is right now. Right. So a few years ago, post competing, my skill level in the off season, like when it came to having some semblance of the social life and all those things, was probably like 185, and now it's like mid to late 170s. Right. So it's going to get better over time. So that's a talk we would have. It's like this is just your comfy body weight when we take into consideration all these moving parts that make up your I guess your setting point that this is just what it is. So, and if they still want to cut, it's like, sure, we'll do it again if it's not neglecting other things we need to work on. But outside of that, I'd say on average, I think one cutting phase a year. That I think that old rule still applies. It's like as long as you're not spending more than a quarter of whatever amount of time you spent on explicitly gaining muscle, that's about how much time you can dedicate to fat loss. And if you're very good at just being weight stable or gaining in a lean manner, it might even be less than that. But I do think routine brush ups, even if you don't need it or if you don't want it, is not a bad thing. So that what happened to us whenever we would try to turn around the other way happens to them where you're just in shock because you're like, my life looks so different. So I think, yeah, I like using fat loss phases with recreational lifters in their off seasons, gaining phases, weight stable recomp for the sake of practice. Because at some point, most everyone's going to want to go through a fat loss phase where It's like, hey, like let's go for it. I want to be like really lean this summer,
You want to
and
see what's under the hood. You're like,
yeah,
I want to see
yeah.
my physique. Like, I want to see the muscle I built. I want to see. So yeah,
You've
you're
been
gonna have
putting
to
away
have.
that money like for how long? It's like
That's
I
it.
want to spend a little bit of it, right?
You're making me
So,
save, but I can't ever go on vacation. What's up with
Yeah.
this?
yeah.
That was kind of I mean, these are all great points, but that was kind of what I was waiting for, is like you've sort of earned this cutting phase through your efforts so far. And you're able to, yeah, it's going to be a satisfying outcome once you get down there.
So I think another point to think is that is like you earned it, right? Like it's for good reason. You're like, okay, I built this muscle, and now I got all my skill set in order. I'm in a great place to now run this cut and be successful doing it. I'm gonna be able to maintain the muscle mass. But when people say I want to run a cut to fix something,
Mm,
that's
it's a
where
red
like the red
flag.
flags come up. Like I
They're
want to,
fixing the
or I
wrong
want,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, or even like I don't know, I want to cut for the beach in 2 months. It's like if okay, that's great. Okay, we get you leaner for the beach, but then what happens after the beach? What do we do then? It's a temporary fix, but is there something that's deeper underneath that maybe you're not happy with? So it's like you kind of have to dive into each person's scenario and context and kind of make a determination on whether or not it's the appropriate move. From a contest prep standpoint, if someone like comes off a season, this happens with a lot of first timers, they rebound. Like you can have a structure in place, say, hey, okay, this is what we need, this is the rate of gain, but recovery diet, etc. It's hard to stay somewhat controlled. And sometimes some people just gain way too much. And then, of course, they might feel bad about it. And the reaction is, I need to fix this. I want to cut. And the last thing they should be doing is cutting at that point, because they're obviously just spend a ton of time being in a deficit, getting to extremely low levels of body fat. And often, if you think about what was the reason why you gain that weight, is because you're out of the routine that you were on. Like the routine and habits you had during prep, they're probably pretty solid habits. It's, just the food was less. So my thing is like, hey, let's see if we can get back to maybe not exact prep habits, but let's get into some good habits again and get into structure again and just let it work itself out. So in a sense, you're creating a new baseline from that point. And typically once you get into routine again, like more so from like a mental standpoint, you feel better about yourself because you're like, okay, I'm back into the groove again. You gain confidence with that. And then you start to see body comp maybe start improving. And, chances are like just organically, you'll probably lose some bloat, a little bit of maybe some body fat, just a little bit, just because you're back into your routine again. So I think it's important that, like for me as a coach, I have empathy towards first time preppers when they're coming off of a prep like that. I'm not going to beat them up because they ate too much. Like almost everyone has done it. It's more so just getting back into the routine and structure. Now, if someone's like, we're talking contest prep again, they're in a lean gaining phase. Like Berto said, just like, okay, it fluctuated a little too high than we wanted, just organically it happened. It's like, what's the timeline? Are we competing next year, the year after that? If there's a long runway there, it's like, probably don't have to do much. You could just sit there and marinate. Okay, big deal. You're 5 pounds heavier. It's like nothing negative is going to happen from that point. And then all we need to do is like think ahead. Like, hey, if you're competing 2 years from now, then we just need to set your trajectory. So we're giving ourselves the runway to take it off. And that's what the pre-prep positioning phase is for. It's like, okay, that's where you kind of take some of that weight off and you get yourself back into a better position to start prep. And even if you're recreational, if your big picture goal is to put muscle on, it's like, it's probably even better because now you have even more time than the contest prepper. It's a little bit more of a relaxed timeline in a sense. So you can stretch things out if you need to. Or if they have good skill set, it's like, okay, maybe you just do a shortcut, clean it up. If you're a little more advanced recreational lifter, clean it up, get back down, you're comfortable again, and we go from there.
Kind of put a little capper on that. Both you guys kind of um, went in depth on kind of what is my approach when it's time to cut. And I can tell sometimes when people that I've worked with for a long time that they reluctantly are asking me if they'd like to cut because they know it's going to be like 20 questions, because to put the capper on it, I want as much context as I can get. You know, what does your training look like? Have you been on a really good hot streak with your training where it's been uninterrupted for like 2 or 3 consecutive blocks? You know, how long have you been at this body weight? Has it been effortless? Have you just been able to stay this body weight, like you said, Berto, within 3% up or down? Not even tracking macros. It's happened, you know, in an effortless fashion, you know. Yeah, I always kind of, it's like asking 20 questions, you know, before I decide if it's right for this person to cut at this point, because, I mean, we're bodybuilders. We're wanting to put on muscle and we're wanting to get stronger. And you want, in my opinion, you want to take your cuts very, very serious and make sure that you've got the skill to do it. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. You know, but at the same time, make it effective. And so you're just gathering as much context as you can before you decide to pull that trigger and make that cut happen.
Yeah, I think we covered pretty much everything here.
I was gonna say 2 more cuts. So 1, if you've been gaining or you're sitting at a higher body fat percentage and you literally have to stuff yourself to maintain that and you're tired of eating, that's a good
point.
reason for a cut. It could be a temporary one. It could be 1 week, 2 weeks, could be a month, whatever it takes to kind of just give your body a break, give yourself a break from doing all that eating. That's one. Another one is just like in our training, like sometimes you're running the same exercises for a long period of time. You're getting kind of bored. You're just like, man, I'm just not excited about this anymore. Like some people get complacent marinating for a long period of time, even though it's productive. Sometimes it's like, hey, just a shift in like just a small phase shift. It's like, okay, there's an excitement, there's a motivation. I'm having fun again. I'm enjoying this. And, you know, so you run the cut, you know, it's successful, great. And then you go back the other way when there's a lot more enthusiasm again to gain and to marinate at certain body weights.
Well, one last thing on the just the contest prep where the gains too much, like post prep. It's kind of like, I guess, when you slip in the rain, it's like you kind of have to go with it as opposed to away from it, especially your first time you come out of a prep, because your body's not going to leave you alone until it gets to a sensible body weight. And you might not like that. Yeah. And what you'll notice is that every time your body just gets better at fixing things. Think my first prep, it was at the touch 190, and finally I was okay. And then and then the prep that you and I did, Brian, remember, Kelsey, your wife, she was like, you guys still look terrible in the face. And it was like many weeks after the prep. And like, you know, at this point, our systems had been through it a few times and we were cured. We just hadn't restored everything yet. And then the last time I prepped, I kid you not, 5 pounds after the show, I was like, oh, wow, that was it. I was expecting to like desserts for a little bit longer than 2 weeks. So that was a little disappointing, but it gets better every time. But the first time, one of the worst things you can do within reason is to like try to fix things. It's just going to keep barking at you.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's also that situation where it's like, let's say somebody was 170 on the way down and they felt great and they overshoot at their 170 on the way back up and they feel terrible. It's like that's probably, they might not need to gain more body fat at that point. There's like the body fat and there's the time element to it as well in terms of recovery. And I think that's a good opportunity to learn early on in your career that you can progress in the gym with just a good environment, more or less maintaining weight without pushing it up further.
What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, click on the products tab, and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you and enjoy the podcast.